Are there any apologies? Apology for Ms. Morrison. Any other apologies? There be no more apologies. I move forward to welcoming members of this committee and the officers from including the permanent secretary from the Ministry of Agriculture. And we'll move to item 5 and take it that the minutes have already been read, given the fact that it was circulated. And I now ask if there's any corrections to the minutes. Are there any corrections? There be no corrections. I move to item 6, matters arising.
Mr. Chair, could I ask that the matters arising be deferred until after we take? I'd like to raise some matter, but deferred until after we take our guests.
Okay, thanks. Okay. Today we have with us the officers from the Ministry of Agriculture. At the last meeting, we decided to invite them as we seek to have matters related to the different. So we did. So can we confirm it without dealing with matters arising? Okay. You'll take it now? Okay, go ahead.
Chairman, I as you have noted, and in the minutes, I wasn't at the last meeting when the items or topics to be addressed was discussed and apparently decided upon. And I was a bit struck by the ones I see mentioned there. And it caused me to revisit the standing orders in terms of what the remit of the committee is. And I read for the committee's attention 73B, Internal and External Affairs Committee. The Internal and External Affairs Committee shall have the duty of A, examining all matters relating to the foreign policy of the government and analyzing the implications and likely effect thereof on Jamaica. B, examining treaties and other international agreements and advising the Parliament of their likely impact on Jamaica. And C, examining matters relating to national security and the administration of justice and making recommendations to the Parliament thereon. As I said, I refreshed my memory, and the standing order reconfirms what my thoughts were. Having read the minutes, I have a little challenge which I would seek assistance with. The items being raised for consideration by this committee, as worthy as they are, whether they are not the remit of other committees, such as the Economy and Production Committee of this House, that deal with matters of economic development, etc. The Cannabis Alternate Development Program, all of those matters are economic development program, very, very critical and essential, but whether or not they belong to this committee. So I would like us to be mindful of that. Otherwise, we find that the committees end up being all over the place.
Thank you very much, Member Jackson. If you were to read the minutes, you would find in the minutes reasons for us to have chosen this matter for discussion here today. As a precedence was set, and we were guided by the clerk who informed us that this matter was on the agenda in the previous administration for discussion. It was not discussed, and therefore we decided that we will take it on today. So we acted under the guidance of the clerk and also by precedence that was set before. And that is why that decision was taken, for us to have the Ministry of Agriculture here today.
Point. I could understand, for example, with the cannabis, where one aspect of the cannabis, one area affecting the local cannabis industry is our international treaties or agreement that allow for transactions internationally in that context. So I'm just saying that there are particular aspects, but not in the global sense. If that is it, then I have no difficulty if it is in those specific area. But when I look at aquaculture, for example, well, let me say, within that context, I have no difficulty.
Thank you very much. I'll now ask for the confirmation of the minutes. Member Wilson, seconded by Member Brown. Okay, we now move to item 7, where we'll have a presentation from the Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries and an overview of the provisions of the Aquaculture, Inland and Marine Products and Byproducts Inspection, Licensing and Export Act 2013 and its implementation. I'll ask the Permanent Secretary to maybe introduce your members and make your presentation with respect to.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It is our pleasure to appear before the Internal and External Affairs Committee for the first time. And with me this morning, my team from the ministry and one of its agencies. To my immediate left is Mr. Orville Palmer. He's the Chief Technical Director in the Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries. To his left is Dr. Gavin Bellamy, and he is the CEO for the National Fisheries Authority. Behind Dr. Bellamy is Dr. Osbill Watson, and he's the Chief Veterinary Officer in the Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries. And to Dr. Watson's right is Miss Marsha Locke, and she's the Senior Legal Officer in the Ministry of Agriculture and Fishery. And to Miss Locke's right is Miss Nadine Robinson. She is the Legal Officer for the National Fisheries Authority. And so the matter that we are speaking to this morning is in relation to the Aquaculture, Inland and Marine Products and Byproducts Inspection and Licensing Act. Accordingly, Mr. Chairman, since I have my legal officers with me, I'm going to just ask our Senior Legal Officer to walk through the presentation that we prepare, if you don't mind. And so, can I invite Ms. Locke to speak in terms of walking us through the legal presentation? All right, Ms. Locke.
Good afternoon, committee members. In 2013, the Aquaculture, Inland Marine Products and Byproducts Inspection, Licensing and Export Act 1999 was amended and renamed the Aquaculture, Inland and Marine Products and Byproducts Inspection, Licensing and Export Change of Name and Amendment Act. It can simply be referred to as the Aquaculture, Inland and Marine Products and Byproducts Inspection and Licensing Act. The purpose of such amendment was to change the name of the principal act and for related matters. This was done in an effort to correct certain anomalies or issues as advised by the Attorney General's chambers based on past legal challenges, in addition to ensuring that the legislation is kept in line with standards to comply with food safety, hygiene, and sanitation measures, particularly for continued access to the European Union and other markets. A major amendment was the deletion from the title of the principal act, the word export. This was done in an effort to unify procedures and requirements relating to food safety for both the domestic market and for export. The benefits to be accrued from this particular change is that Jamaicans locally will gain access to safer food or fishery products harvested, transported, processed, handled, and stored in satisfactory hygiene conditions. Another major amendment was to clarify the definition of the term consignor, as the old definition was unclear in relation to who could export prescribed products. The old definition had resulted in legal challenges in the past. The revised definition provides as follows. Consignor means a person who operates a licensed processing establishment or licensed factory vessel, freezer vessel, or carrier vessel, and exports any aquaculture, inland, or marine product, or any of its byproducts. There are numerous other amendments, inclusive of deletions, to bring the revised act to a state which renders it more relevant to trade requirements. Almost all amendments as outlined by the 2013 amendments have been implemented, and the Veterinary Services Division is currently liaising with the National Fisheries Authority to conduct further streamlining of the processes relating to inspection and licensing of regular small canoes or vessels owned and operated by artisanal fishers across the island. This requires that prior to the issuance of a fishing license to any fisher, there must be compliance with the Public Health Act, the Aquaculture, Inland and Marine Products and Byproducts Inspection and Licensing Act, hereinafter referred to as the Act, and the Veterinary Services Division requirements, inclusive of the presentation of a valid food handler's permit issued by the Ministry of Health and Wellness. This is already being done for several artisanal fishers, particularly those engaged in the export trade by working alongside industrial fishers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that principally gives an introduction generally to the major changes. Other major changes would involve the establishment or ramification that surrounds the board, the veterinary committee, and designation of the competent authority and what they're responsible for doing, which would be the veterinary services, as well as the specific activity, different sections, like for example, Section 8 of the Act and sets out the function of the committee and things of that matter. We could continue just going through what is prepared, and I don't know if the committee would have questions as it relates to any particular area of interest, any particular matter that requires qualification. I've been given that introductory presentation.
Thank you very much. Members, any issue that you would want to raise at this point?
For the Ministry of Agriculture, but the pertinent section of the ministry is not here today, which is a point I raised a while ago about an area which is of interest to Jamaica with the cannabis industry and our ability or inability to export, and whether or not from a phytosanitary perspective, if there are any requirements to be met, and already are we, whether or not those are conditions being set and monitored by the CLA. I know those kinds of scientific activities would fall in the remit of the specialists, which would not be there, but would be elsewhere, like the veterinary services department, etc. But I say I wasn't around when the topic was being selected, but as I said, I have the ministry here. Maybe I'll ask them at another place, because the PS is a permanent member of the parliament. And he comes very often, so I will defer to one of those other occasions.
But Mr. Chairman, if you permit me, I just quickly advise member that the Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries is not responsible for the CLA and its attendant matters. It's really in the industry. And so the competent authorities here would not be able to respond to you accordingly unless it's in their, private expressions, but not in relationship to the policies issues surrounding the CLA.
Indulgence, Chair. But from a phytosanitary issues, would it be the ministry even in collaboration?
Neither.
Neither, okay.
Neither. The Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Industry and Commerce really deals with the CLA. And justice. My legal advisor just informed me that I must include justice.
You have the former legal advisor and the informal legal advisor. That's how Dr. Watson comporting with the observation.
Mr. Pierce, could you enlighten us on the implementation process as it relates to the procedure surrounding this act?
All right. The section of the ministry that is responsible for implementation is really the Veterinary Services Division. So I'm going to ask Dr. Oswald Watson to just update us on where we are with that. And Dr. Bellamy, the NFA, could add as we see relevant, if you don't mind, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Watson.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair and committee members. As was outlined, the Parent Act, the 1999 Act, the Aquaculture, Inland and Marine Products and Byproducts Inspection, Licensing and Export Act, was promulgated then to enable Jamaica to access the lucrative market in the EU for conch and lobster. Well, conch in the primary instance, but lobster and other fishery products. That would have been done in line with visits from the European Union Food and Veterinary Office. A delegation of inspectors would have come to determine whether or not Jamaica would have complied not only with the regulations that were and the law that were promulgated, but also that the facilities, our harvesting and production area and the PJ banks, etc., would have met the requirements based on European Union law. As we went along, we began to learn more of the process, so that the EU indicated that in order to continue to export, we have to meet the equivalent in terms of our legislation. And so as soon as the EU would have updated their directives, we would have to access them on the website and see where we fall short. So it is a continuous process. One of the issues, for example, Mr. Chair, is that, for example, the monitoring for Conch, where we have to do several laboratory investigations, like heavy metals, lead, cadmium, mercury, and for bacterial analysis, and importantly for dangerous toxins that could be in Conch. And that we had to go through because in the EU, the matter of marine gastropods, bivalve mollusk, came under the same law, so that when they do their mollusks, the mussels, etc., near shore, the same law that applies to them must apply to us, even though when we tell them that our conch is produced in the pristine waters of the PJ banks, we still have to do that. So in 2013, as was outlined, we'd have identified several weak areas which needed strengthening, and as such, that was done. So pretty much the 2013 revised act would have been a continued implementation of the 1999 Parent Act, which pretty much has helped us to continue to access lucrative markets in the EU, in China, and in other countries. And as I said before, it's pretty much a daily activity that my inspectors have to visit the EU website to see when they amend the law, what the implications are for us, and to see where we can liaise with our legal department and then the Attorney General's chamber to do necessary amendments where necessary. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I might just add that in a summary way, we are well underway in terms of implementing the Act. The provisions as set out in Section 37, the Aquaculture, Inland and Marine Byproducts and Byproducts Inspection Regulation 2000. The said regulations include, among other things, relevant provision to give effect to the international standards and recommended practices or health requirements for the harvesting, processing, handling, storage, and transportation of aquaculture, inland and marine byproducts. Fees to be paid for in respect of the license, inspection, sampling, and such other services as a competent authority may determine. The manner of keeping records, the regularity and supply of information to any importing country or person, the standards required in relation to sanitation, hygiene, and in respect of licensed processing establishment, cold storage facilities, or licensed vessels. So we are implementing, and there's been high level of response and compliance, except in one small area where the Veterinary Services Division really is responsible for implementing. The Fisheries, the NFA, it would be the major stakeholder area in which the people who are complying would fall. So there's a little bit of challenge between the requirements surrounding some of the definition, one in particular to deal with the carrier vessel. And so that's an area that requires continuous evaluation because the definition and the attendant promulgation of the law, what will be required there, we're noticing that it can provide, it can create some challenge for the small operators to comply. But all in all, we have been working on it to ensure that they come up to speed. You see, the overall situation creates value chain development, even in how the Act is promulgated. And the investments that are required for full compliance we are not seeing them as how we would want them. So there's to be a distinction on how things are executed in relationship to a carrier vessel, a freezer vessel, and the dories are canoes that would fish and provide those products to the freezer vessel or carrier vessel for transshipment. There are some specified handling conditions to provide sanitary facilities and all of that. And so we have to be working. These are areas of challenges. It would not be for us to just come and say everything is okay. You know, as lawmakers, you need to be aware that we have some area of challenges, and these are some area of challenges that we are working through.
Member Jackson.
Yes, I'm a little bit concerned there. You mentioned about the continuing effort for the administering the provisions under the Act. But as Dr. Watson pointed out, the promulgation of this legislation in 1999 was in order to meet the EU standard to enable our mainly conch exporters. And part of that regime was each of the exporting facility had to be certified by the local authority in keeping with the governing local legislation, hence the 1999 legislation. That would give authority, and it sets out the various provisions for inspections and approvals and so on. Along the entire chain, all the personnel involved and the individual and the facilities, you know, that the product moves along before it gets from coming out the sea on the vessel, the plant, it comes in and is cleaned and so forth and packaged and then shipped to the EU market. My understanding is that we had complied with that requirement, hence the exports were continuing. So I was a little bit concerned. I hear you say we are seeking to, because I understand, I would take it that that has been in place, being operated in place, and my subsequent question to that is, where are we in terms of our levels of export to the EU, given many changes that have been made in the EU as it regards to exports from ACP countries like ours on the one hand. And the second question, emanating from that regulatory regime I mentioned of the 1999 regime, is it required as a condition for export in the US? Because I know the US market was the other major market opportunity for us in Jamaica. But at the time, the US was not as scrupulous or demanding of those legislative provisions as the Europeans were in each of the EU. So hence my second question as to what is happening on that side, the exports to the US, and two, if their import conditions are as, quote unquote, my word, stringent as the EU were or EU is.
Right. Thank you, member. Asbil, would you like to go at that question first?
Thank you very much, member. I love the question. Real good questions, pertinent questions. As it relates to, and I would have alluded to it earlier, the 1999 Act. The EU, from time to time, would update, revise, etc., their laws, and we have to comply. We have to search for them where we see them, and to ensure that we comply. So it's an ongoing process, even up to now. Since 1999 to present, we would have gone through at least 2 to 3 physical audits by the EU Inspectorate. They did 2 back-to-back, 2006 and 2007. 2007 was because they found some deficiencies in 2006, which they wanted to ensure that we implemented. So some of those deficiencies would be, for example, in terms of the harvesting area on the PJ banks, etc. So those were addressed, and we continue to address them as we go along. the entities, well, in the first instance, Jamaica, the country Jamaica, would have been listed on what's known as the European Union third country listing. That's available on the website at europa.eu. It's available for public viewing, and on that website, they have also, apart from the fact that Jamaica is authorized to export to the EU conch and fishery products, they also have the list of facilities in Jamaica that we would have certified to be exported, to export these products. They, in order to export to the EU and recently to China, they have to be listed on their website. In addition to that, the vessels, the harvesting vessels, the vessels that go there to harvest the conch, etc., those vessels also have to be listed on the EU website. Because when I issue a certificate, a health certificate for export of a shipment of conch to Germany, when it gets to the border, the inspector checks the list to see whether or not the facility is coming from is on the list. So pretty much we have worked with the industry and our stakeholders, in particular the National Fisheries Authority, to ensure that we comply with all of the guidelines. And in fact, we have done, in addition, 2 desk audits, one in 2014, that's 2 EU desk audits, where they send us documents of several pages to see where we are. So one was done in 2014, and they were satisfied. One we just recently completed. It was sent off on the 15th of May of this year. And I just got another one 2 weeks ago to be sent off by mid-August in relation to our current legislation and all of the processes involved in the export process. So it is a dynamic process as it relates to export of products. The EU remains the dominant marketplace for most of the conch, frozen lobster. Now we have an option in relation to exporting to China, frozen lobster, live lobster also. The US, so when it comes on to like lobster, the market is a little more diverse. But as it relates to conch, most of the conch goes to the EU market. And we do have a vibrant, lobster market going on with currently to all of those markets which I mentioned before.
Mr. Chairman, might I just add that prior to the closure of the conch season, and this was now a self-imposed closure based on what was happening, we were up to 500 metric tons, 450 specifically for export, and 50 for artisanal local consumption. And this was still with a potential prior to those 2 years that we closed of going up to as high as 800 metric tons. So the industry would have seen an increase up to that point from about 150 over a number of years, going all the way up to as much as 550 metric tons for export. If you will, that is for conch for the EU. So if you will, Mr. Chairman, the industry has been vibrant and the market has been good. Our closure over the period was as a result of our situation, our issues, and we have settled that and we have reopened following the assessment, and the market is ready and waiting. The comparative situation with the United States is that the price is not as attractive in the US, and they want 100% clean conch. And the 100% requires further processing, and the comparative costs as opposed to, how much, 80% for, how much percent for the EU? 50% clean is not competitive. So we'd have to have demand satisfied in the EU and overflowing to really hit that, you know. So that's how it has been.
And Chair, just to complete the point about the guidelines, the U.S. Requirements, they are not as stringent as those of the EU. We find them getting a bit stricter because we attempted to export. There's a facility out in St. Elizabeth that wanted to do bassa fish. We valiantly attempted to access the export market for that, but in 2015 the US changed the law, making it almost equivalent to exporting meat, beef, chicken, so that the requirements became very stringent. But for now, as it relates to export of fishery products to the US, of course there has to be FDA registration of the facilities, along with other basic requirements, and of course the well-touted adherence to the IUU fishing guidelines, which is the illegal, unreported, unregulated fishing, which my colleague, Dr. Bellamy, would be more eloquent to tell you about. But that is very critical as we move forward in terms of trade, because especially the EU wants to know that we can regulate any illegal fishing that would occur in our waters. Thank you.
I have Member Clark and then Member Wilson. Just to update members that Parliament starts at 2, so we go until 1:30.
I'll be quick, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I noticed we are speaking of two main products, conch and lobster, but conch in a larger amount. The question that I ask, with all the variables that have been spoken of, and the increase over the years of metric tons that we are exporting, are you of the belief or the opinion that we are supplying the demand, or is it that there is a demand that we are unable to supply? First question. Of conch.
Dr. Bellamy, you want to?
Yeah, well, for the demand of conch, sir, for one, conch is a managed fishery, and the national exportable quota is determined scientifically, where we do surveys and a determination is made how much is allowed, that we don't damage the population. We want this to be sustainable. So will always be a greater demand than what we are supplying, but we have to manage it, that it's something for the future.
Mr. Chairman, now that Dr. Bellamy did answer the next part of a question that I wanted to ask, is it prudent or is it feasible for us to establish a nursery as it relates to the producing of conch within our waters? Is it something that we can encourage so that you will now get past that stage of over-harvesting per year? Because naturally, what we're doing right now is really freelancing, so to speak. But can we control the supply by virtue of producing from how I would say, from nothing to something then? I mean, to produce it rather than just to go fish for it.
Well, member, first of all, yes, they have conch hatcheries, they have conch establishments where you can do it. But what I will advise the panel is this, that the National Fisheries Authority has a tried and proven management system, which we are using. Also this year, when we reopened the conch industry, we closed a section of the Pedro Bank. So basically we are using that as a nursery to maintain the stock. So there are no fish areas, basically a sanctuary for the conch where it will develop. The Marine Lab in Discovery Bay has a small conch development hatchery, and this is a project that the FAO is doing in the Caribbean, and we have been dealing with them on seeing if we could implement such in Jamaica. But right now we are using a natural border to help us to maintain the stocks.
See, Mr. Chairman, this is what I want to get from the ministry, because it is something that we have to encourage, because it is trade in any country is very vital to the survival of a sovereign state. And if we have a niche market such as the conch market, I don't see the reason why the advice or the reference cannot come from the ministry to say to government that this is one of the areas that we need to pay attention to, because yes, we may be paying attention to sugar, for example, and we understand where we are with sugar production, but here we have conch, which there is always that demand for it, but we are unable to supply because of the nature of farming or producing. And so if there is something that can be done within the laboratories to make it easier for us to produce more, then this is what we want to get from the ministry, so that government or governance can make a decision as to where we spend that vital money.
Might I, Mr. Chairman? So it's a very excellent point that you have raised, member. The fact is, the ministry has made that approach to government, and it has resulted in what you have in front of you now, which is a National Fisheries Authority, as opposed to the Fisheries Division, which was just a department within the ministry. Now, the new Fisheries Act, which took over 20 years to pass, is giving rise not only to the NFA, government haven't taken a serious decision to move it forward, but a whole restructured organization that is now fit for purpose, with divisions and sections inside there that is going to see to research and development, monitoring and compliance. It's a first. The legal officer that is sitting behind me was recently employed. And this is giving rise now to the development of the regulations emanating from the Act to ensure that we are able to move in this direction. The presentation by Dr. Bellamy of the demarcated area for nursery was a direct response as to the new thinking. But notwithstanding that, just as how we are looking at new species development, we're looking at how we preserve and develop endangered species. Now, the Jamaican model is recognized internationally, and I want to say this here so that this is something for note. When there's an international lobby against the harvesting and handling of endangered species, as well as and in the international space, there are lobby groups that have taken the matter to court in the United States and other areas. And the Jamaican model has always been used as one of the most developed fishery and most managed fishery, and is held up in the international court as an example, and that would assist the defense in putting forward the argument that continues to allow for the sustainable engagement and harvest of the thing. So we have been looking at, just like you are saying, how do we enhance that special spot that we have? And that's one of the first steps. We are looking at things like sea cucumber, And we are looking at not only sending conch to the EU, but want to expand in the Chinese market and other markets, as we have done with lobster. We have already initiated the request for market access, and we are negotiating now as we speak. There's a facility over in Port Royal that was developed jointly with the University of the West Indies, in which you can culture things like sea cucumber. And so that is something that we're looking at. We have done the research, we understand how it operates. We would have mentioned, the minister would have mentioned in his budget presentation, the very high demand and the lucrative market for such new species. And that's work that is we're undergoing right now, having starting what we call a limited fishery with the potential to earn significant sums of US dollars. So we are reviewing and revising and making fit for purpose as approved by government. The NFA is coming to us at very expensive cost. A new CEO, you would understand that his package is not a small package really. And the staff that is attended there. We have new vessels, equipment, and so it is that direction that we are going in with this research area, the market development area that is embedded inside there to take on these new things. And many more to come, Mr. Chairman, because we're looking at crabs, we're looking at oysters, we're looking at urchins, we're looking at tuna. You would have heard ministers in the past talking about the tuna going by Jamaica to be harvested down in Barbados and this kind of thing. We recognize that a significant portion of our food import bill is protein, and that big portion there is marine-based protein. And we are trying to really tap into that, not only for local consumption, but the huge lucrative market that exists internationally. So I really appreciate that point, Mr. Chairman, and we're going to double our efforts in that direction because it's something that can really help this country. The blue economy potential is tremendous, and so all of these legislation and laws that we are putting in place is to help us to tap into it more. Because as we are trying to tap into it, there are lots of forces internationally that is putting a lot of pressure on any individual country to capitalize on the resources that are out there.
Thank you very much. Member Wilson, final question.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you, PS. In fact, you touched on a few of the points that I wanted. Well, you answered a few of the questions I wanted to raise in terms of, well, first, to diversify the market from the EU, because, you know, while it's awesome and tremendous that they're taking the majority of conch from us at the moment, it's also a big risk that in the event that they decide to switch to another country, we are left with this huge amount of conch that we have to dispose of. And as well, you know, it's becomes even more critical because you're now building out an industry around the fisheries department. And I'm encouraged. I hear the minister speak about focusing on aquaculture as his main thrust. And I'm encouraged by that because it's something that I do believe, coming from Westmoreland, we have the Negril Fishermen Corps, and we also have one in Broughton. And these individuals, they make their livelihoods out of fishing. And it would be very good if we could, and this is on to my second question, which is looking at diversifying away from just conch and lobster. I am aware you mentioned, Dr. Watson, about sea bass, but there are other fish that we could also export. So I was trying to figure out whether you guys had on the table a list of other products, and I think you answered that to some degree as to what you guys are looking at. But I would want to know now from the production side, and this is not internal, external, but probably from a more development perspective, which are the areas you're looking, because I hear mention of Port Royal, but I don't hear any mention of Westmoreland. And being that I'm a representative, and the only representative from Westmoreland in this chair, and the fact that we have so many fishing village, White House, we have one in Sav, we have one in Broughton, and one in Negril, would want to know how the new CEO is planning to earn his keep by expanding this program into my neck of the woods and include those fisher folks. All right, so thank you guys, and tremendous work you have been doing. I'm encouraged by it as a Jamaican, and I think if you keep on the same path, you guys will really be something of a light and shining armor for how we are developing emerging industries within the agriculture sector.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm gonna ensure that your response is thorough by inviting Dr. Bellamy to speak on both the strategies that we are embarking on the marine side, as well as the strategies that we are embarking on the aquaculture side. Now, I've made that distinction to add clarity to your question, because there's a whole other development that is taking place on the inland aquaculture side, and as well as the marine side. Dr. Bellamy.
Thank you, member. But I must reassure you, just last week or the week before, I was in your area working with your fisher folk to make sure that they understand what the NFA is about and how we are encouraging the development of new fisheries. Okay, first of all, the PS mentioned it. We are encouraging, and we are through the World Bank project, which is a diversification, a climate resilient project for diversification of alternative livelihood for fisher folk. We're dealing with deep sea, long line fishing, PS mentioned tuna. So that is also FADS, which is fishery aggregating devices, where you place devices off the reefs to attract the fish, that the fisher folk can go a bit further but get a better harvest. These are all things being done right now. We're in the process of procuring a training vessel to teach the artisanal fishers how to do this. Since we're running short on time, I'll speak about the aquaculture. We're developing the aquaculture industry right now. We're about to, starting this year, we're looking to put in a recirculated hatchery where the seed stock for aquaculture farming will be sufficient, that you won't have a shortage. We're also encouraging polyculture, where it's like tilapia plus shrimp in a pond, which will increase the earning powers of the farmers. And out at Bowden, we're going to be developing an area to do mariculture, where we'll have hatcheries for mariculture. We're looking at alternatives. Sea moss, around in your neck of the woods, we're doing oyster farming also in the bays. So these are all things that we're encouraging. But I see the chairman is getting worried about the time, so I'll stop here now.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm just saying, what we can do is our first time in front of this committee.
On a point of order, Mr. Chairman. Rather than have the technocrats rushing to give us the information because of the time, can we ask them to come back to discuss, even at greater length with us? Because I realize that Dr. Bellamy has a wealth of knowledge that he really wants to impart. And so...
You can take that decision after in our committee's consultation.
Mr. Chairman, I was about to say that what we could do is prepare a document in terms of the opportunities and submit, and if the committee sees fit, you can call us back and we take it from there. So I'll ask Dr. Bellamy to prepare that just to finalize the answers to the question. On behalf of the team, Chairman, thank you very much for having us, if it is end or ending the interaction. And I too was wondering if this is the committee that we should be at.
On that note, Chair, I confer with at least one of my colleagues. We would have seen from the discussions that the subjects rightfully belong to the Economy and Production Committee. Very pertinent questions being raised, and therefore, for the continuation on these subjects, I do have a couple of other questions I'd love to ask, but in all frankness, it doesn't belong here. That we move a motion to transfer the subject to the Economy and Production Committee, and you as chairman, have dialogue with the chairman of that committee to carry on the subject. So, because after the deliberations take place here, a report has to be generated to be tabled to the full House to get the benefit of the full debate of the members. And the nature of the subject, I think, is rightfully belonging there, that it can be fully ventilated and the members from the team can fully ventilate and expand on the subject areas so that the Parliament can get the benefit of that knowledge. So I'm going to move that motion and I ask the support of my colleague.
I second that motion. Second that motion, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. All right. In the interest of time, I will now ask for the adjournment. And just to say that to members that we have the Ministry of Tourism next week, 12:30 next Tuesday. We want to thank the officers from the Ministry of Agriculture and for your enlightening presentation, and we look forward to having you back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
If needs be. Thank you very much.